Introduce our awesome guests, so thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mary Beth, for coming here. This is really awesome. Can we just give a round of applause for And I do a terrible job of introductions. That's why I leave it up to our guests to introduce themselves and do something a little bit different. So introduce yourself, maybe how you got into sales. Sorry. Good stuff there. So you got the other applause. Say that for at the end. But also just share one interesting, unique thing that someone might not know about you. So maybe I like that slide.
Very nice handoff there. Mary Beth Cockerham. I've been in sales for a long time, probably more years than many of you have been alive. So 30 plus, and we'll just leave it there. Spent the majority of my career at Sun Microsystems, and there's an alum, a fellow alum here in the room, Tim, and 21 years there, fun-filled roller coaster of a ride. Put myself on a RIF list and laid myself off back in the early 2000s, and then went to work for a very small market research company, which was then acquired 5 years later. So I worked for a company called Deltek. They're headquartered out in Herndon. So Herndon, for all of you who live in the district and don't venture beyond Arlington, is out by Dulles Airport. So trust me, it's almost to West Virginia. It's fine, there are people out there. So we're headquartered in Herndon. We're a global company of about 3,000 people, and we sell software and services to project-based businesses, but what that really means here in the area is government contractors. And I sell a market research tool that tells vendors what the government's about to buy so that you can get in on the action. So that's what I sell. It's called Government IQ. It's great. So 31 years. The interesting fact that he just sprung on me is that not only am I a committed sales professional, I'm passionate about the sales career, but I have 2 kids, both of whom have successfully graduated from college, and one is an SDR right now, has been selling or in the sales process for just about a year, and the other one just graduated in May and is in the midst of interviewing, most likely for a sales position. So it's now the family business. So I'm very much committed to the entire business.
Awesome.
Yep. So that's my story.
Great. So my name is Carrie Ann Mosley. I work for SAP America. I've been in sales since 1994, and I got into sales because I was a software developer, only I was really bad at it.
Terrible programmer.
I mean, I was in IT, and they were like, maybe we should give her a job building software instead, since she's not keeping our LAN up in a very reliable manner. So I got delegated around IT and then into development, and I didn't like the silence in my office. And so when I moved from Booz Allen to Oracle in 1994, my boss at Booz Allen said, "Oh, you get to talk to people on the phone all the day. That's the perfect job for you." and so I was with Oracle for 14 and a half years and worked my way around in sales. I worked with Mike there at Oracle, and then I left Oracle and went to Salesforce, and I was in Salesforce.com and the Salesforce ecosystem for about 5 years. And then about a year and a half ago, I made the move over to SAP because my family wanted to see me every now and then, and I was traveling a lot internationally. So, and now I get to work with really fun customers. So I have hospitality, so I have a great excuse to stay at the Ritz-Carlton when I business travel because they're one of my customers. And I know it's awful. It's awful. So I have hospitality, most of the major hotel chains, and then consumer packaged goods. So I have really fun customers like Mars and Hershey and Campbell Soup. So we make a lot of things with Campbell Soup in my house, staple of the diet. And I also have all the sports teams and leagues, which is real fun because I'm a big sports gal. So I went to the NFL, and my second meeting there, I went up to the main reception area where they have all the Super Bowl rings, and I was really like a child in a toy store, and I said, "Can I take pictures?" And they said, "Yeah, most people do." And one fun fact about me, so a few years ago, I went to Singapore on business, and I was really surprised pleasantly at how gorgeous it was for country and how clean it was. And when I came back, I noticed litter really permeating everywhere in America. And so I joined a group called Keep Loud and Beautiful, and I just won my first grant that I wrote the grant proposal and everything all by myself to do a cigarette litter cleanup of my county. So, so I'm a big like anti-litter person.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'll tell you, well, I'm going to Singapore in August, so. But
Don't bring your chewing gum.
Don't bring your chewing gum. I've learned that, but I was surprised how amazingly just orderly, clean everything is. It's a total like difference. When I walk around New York, it's not necessarily as clean. I'm just going to say that for example. I want to just kick off things. We're going to talk about this ideal enterprise sales, but I always like to gauge the way people perceive the changes in sales. And obviously, both of you have been in sales for a long time. So what have you seen change the most? And maybe you can start off first, because we had a really interesting conversation earlier today about that.
Yeah, so for me, what I've seen change most, and I think there is someone from Corporate Executive Board here in the audience, but CEB did a study about customers, and customers are so much more informed. They're, 60% of the sales cycle is complete before they reach out to a vendor, and that's a really stunning thing to me, because no longer is it necessarily just a relationship sale. There has to be a lot of value, and you have to be constantly educating your customers to stay in front of things. And so for me, I think, it's both the complexity of companies that you're selling to has changed, but really it's the level of education of the customer about the options that are available to them. And it's almost a little bit dangerous, right? Because we all sort of, you get a rash and you page Dr. Google and you think you're a doctor. Well, similarly, our customers go online and and think that they're doing all this great research, and they get very lopsided information. And so I find that staying in front of that customer education process is really an art.
Along the same lines, I would say that one of the things I've noticed is the blurring of the distinction between inside sales and outside sales or field sales, because nobody wants to see a sales rep anymore. Nobody has the time, whether you're coming to their facility or you're actually trying to entertain them at your corporate office, nobody wants to go anywhere, or they can't afford it, they don't have a travel budget. So I really chafe at that distinction, because we have people who are selling sizable deals and get 90% of the deal done over the phone, and with WebEx and GoToMeeting and all those fine tools. So that distinction doesn't exist in my mind anymore. And when people try and relegate some of my sales teams as inside sales, it's like, well, I've got enterprise folks who are sitting in the cube next to them, so are they? They're inside too. So I think that's one distinction, one change that I've really seen. I completely agree with the educated consumer, or informed / potentially misinformed consumer.
Yes.
And I think that's a challenge, because sometimes you have to suss out what do they know already, and what preconceived notions do they bring to the conversation that you may have to correct. That's really hard to try and get your head around sometimes. So I would say that willingness. I mean, we used to do things like smokestacking, where we go out on a field sales call, and I would be with a rep and on a ride along and say, okay, there's that building, that's where we're going later. Who's in these 3 or 4 buildings? And you just don't do that anymore. Security won't let you wander. You can't go in and just kind of pop in and see corporate people. All that has to be done over the phone. So I think that's been a major kind of approach change that I've witnessed.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. I've gone the same thing. Like a lot of these quote-unquote field sales or enterprise sales teams are actually more in the office than out. Before it used to be as a manager, you have to kick them out. Like, no, you get out of the office, get out of here. And now it's more like, oh yeah, maybe you can come back in. Because I don't know if we want to pay all those expense budgets.
But then we're going to track your phone calls, and they hate that too, right? So,
one way or the other to get you. I want to just define enterprise sales, because obviously this group is called Enterprise Sales Meetup, but we have a little bit of a broader purview around just B2B sales. But what do you think about enterprise sales? What does it actually mean to you in practice?
Sure. We, at Deltec, we have a very, at least for my sales organization, we've got a very definitive line. And it's all based on the annual revenues of the company. Anything from $0 to $200 million, my SMB team covers. And anything 201 million and above in annual revenues, my enterprise reps, which is a smaller subset, cover. And we do that because historically, our experience is that those sales are longer, far more complex. You know, a sales rep with 1 or 2 years of experience isn't necessarily prepared to navigate through a more complex process with a lot of decision makers and influencers and a whole big corporate purchasing, back end that they've got to contend with. So that's how we define it, is that we use it just as a very hard and fast revenue limit. And certainly if you're calling on a company that's $180 million, they can be just as complex. And frankly, you said earlier, those small deals sometimes take more time and are harder, but that's how we make the distinction.
Yes, and we do the same. We have, certain groups that handle quote-unquote enterprise accounts. I think where we're seeing the line blur and where companies have to have discretion is you almost have to have the ability to pick a winner. Because, one of the accounts that my team covers is Chobani. And we also had doTERRA Oils. I mean, these are companies like doTERRA Oils. How many people know what that is even? Well, they're well over $1 billion, and they're a multi-level marketing company that sells oil, like medicinal oils, essential oils, and but yet they are growing by leaps and bounds. And had some smart person not recognized that and put them on a list, they may or may not have gotten the appropriate help that they need as they're becoming a big company. SAP, we're very fortunate that we have some really amazing brands, but like one of the brands that we work with very closely is Under Armour. And Under Armour has been with us since they were a $750 million company. And so we've helped them grow. But I think that's one of the bigger challenges of doing some of the segmentation is somewhere along the way someone has to look and also just be mindful of the trends in like the high growth companies so that you can make sure that you capture those early so that you don't miss a ServiceNow that goes from we never heard of them to a giant in 5 years. And I think that that's really an interesting challenge for companies, particularly like ours, that have these very defined segments, because it's allowing smaller niche vendors who are a little maybe hungrier and have more of just that dialing approach to get into some of these companies early on.
And I want to talk about just kind of the way of engaging with these companies at that really early stage when you don't have a relationship. But just quick poll: who here sell B to G? Who here has like a decent sized government business? It's out of curiosity. And so it's all pretty much all B2B then. Are you selling to SMB mid-market? Anyone raising a hand? Yeah? Yeah, okay. Who are selling to kind of the quote-unquote enterprise, large company, big deals? All right, so kind of like a smattering of both. And one of the interesting things is, because you mentioned this idea of like smaller companies that are nimble, they have a much more constrained solution or product that they can offer, and they can go in, and they generally use this land and expand approach. But for yourself, I mean, how are you thinking about that early engagement? Whether you're trying to sell this big vision, big solution, or you're trying to get in the door?
So I'll tell you about our sales cycle at Chobani. So Chobani is not a customer of ours. They're thinking about it, but they currently use a competitive product. And we were really struggling to get in there because they don't want to be bothered. Nobody wants to be bothered. And again, their perception was SAP, big solution, lots of expense. We don't want that. So we, I'm not going to lie, sent the CEO doTERRA Oil and an Under Armour shirt and a letter saying, listen, we've just signed with this company that's $1 billion that wants to be a $10 billion company, doTERRA Oils. You may or may not have heard of them, but they've outgrown the system that you're using today. and they are moving ahead, and we've been with Under Armour since they were $750 million. Again, less revenue than you have today, but they've accredited SAP software that we've sold them, helping them solve big problems and create revenue streams with companies like Walmart. And so for us, we do some very targeted and try to be creative. Now, I will tell you, the CIO was really pissed off when we did that, I'm not gonna lie, because he wasn't responsive to us. So we were like, what have we got to lose? We'll just go straight to the CEO. He seems like a great guy on TV. You know, I mean, sometimes you've got to be creative. The other thing that we're actually employing a little more to just try to get in is US mail, just mailing people letters. I mean, we've gotten away from letters, now your inbox is totally full, so we're mailing stuff like right and left, and it's actually working. We're getting more sort of attention by mailing things, so we've kind of gone back to this 90s selling where you put stuff in the mail.
It's amazing. Talking to someone who had like a mail outreach strategy, said, yeah, well, if you do that, make lumpy packages, because everyone likes the lumpy packages. They think like, well, what is that? What is it? It's like the appeal, just the novelty of it really strikes people. But what are you seeing work right now? What's getting people's attention?
So we have this whole, so ours is a land and expand for the most part. So Deltek can tell a really nice big story, but if I can sell one product from the portfolio in there, I'll do that, and then, you know, hopefully we'll engage further. We have this whole strategy called Show Me, You Know Me, which, you know, so we have a volume end where we're just banging the phones. There's nothing pretty about it necessarily, and that's my team. But we also have the enterprise sales side that I support, and we have analysts who do research. So they're out there, you know, we have the target accounts, we've got the target people. We are researching, Googling, you know, reading annual reports. What column did they just write? Were they just interviewed? So is there a nugget or two? Are there nuggets that I can basically, and then build a message around that, make it relevant, but then it just says, hey, I've done some research. This is not just a script, you know, a mass import, you know, name change thing. This is something that has some relevance, because if a company's that big and has that much potential, it's worth a little bit of research. It's worth a customized or semi-customized message. And that's worked really well for us, because people that wouldn't, you know, don't pick up the phone or don't read an email, they may read one with a really good subject line, a link to an interview they did recently, etc. It just says we've invested some time and we get it, and maybe we can even distill. You know, annual reports are really good at calling out their challenges and the things that their priorities for the next year. Can we help one of those priorities? Well, then let's talk about that. So it's all Show Me, You Know Me at that targeted account marketing level.
And I think they also do what we do, but a lot of reference selling. So if I'm targeting an account like Chobani, I'm going to talk about my success in dairy and what best practices we bring to the table and why they should actually be more afraid about not going with us. You know, because we are in a sales cycle with another dairy company, and they were like, we don't even want to consider you. And we were like, no, this is why that's a foolish approach. And so I think if you can offer them really, you know, you have to know the companies that you've sold to in the past, and then realize how you can make them even unnamed references and talking about the success and what specific value they got out of employing your software that this customer will be very interested in.
It's out of curiosity, I mean, do you actively like name drop necessarily, like specific names?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, definitely.
Unless we're contractually
And goes
prohibited.
Yeah,
Oh,
unless we can't.
yeah. I do a lot of financial services, and you know, we talked about this company and had, well, you know, it's a big box, and you know, a few descriptive things. It's a blue logo, and
Yes.
that's really about it. You know, we were talking about that today. One of your customers, which has a little silver candy that you
Which
put in the
Hershey
pocket.
candy. Yeah, Hershey's one of my customers.
But the other thing I want to kind of get into, because things do tend to get competitive. You have the smaller, nimbler companies coming in, and then you have the biggest competitor of them all, which is status quo.
Yeah.
Or that one.
Inertia is the biggest
Inertia.
competitor.
Yeah, status quo.
Yeah.
So,
Status quo.
you know, you're bringing obviously some pretty significant solutions to bear when you're engaged with customers. So, you know, how are you positioning against status quo to move the thinking forward, as well as to, you know, try and box out competitors?
I mean, for us, it's all about the financial compelling case that you make for the customer. How are they either gonna, cut costs, grow revenue, something, you have to make that case. What is the ROI gonna be for them, and the numbers have to be real. I mean, that's, I would say, the other big difference from today. Soft savings are nice, but unless someone's either taking a quota increase, or you're gonna literally cut jobs, I find that it's a lot harder to get people's attention from an ROI perspective. And so I think that's the other place where you really make a lot of progress is making that financial case to your customers. And what I find a big challenge for folks is that if you get in a room with a CFO, even I'm like super intimidated by that, but we as enterprise salespeople have to really educate ourselves. And there's a great book out there, and I'll give it to you, but it's basically improving your financial acumen skills for managers. But you can read it whether you're a manager or not, and it has one chapter, chapter 6 is like the golden nugget chapter about ROI and how companies actually truly can measure ROI and what factors into ROI on the customer's side, the company's side that you need to factor in, because of course we can all make ROI look amazing, like it's gonna be amazing for you. If you get this software, it's gonna be like amazing. You're gonna be the hero of, your executive board. But at the end of the day, now if the numbers aren't real, it's really hard. I find, at any size company, small company, mid company, big company, it's all about the numbers and when is it going to pay off.
I'm so glad you mentioned the financial acumen of a salesperson. I think I can't stress that enough. I don't think as salespeople, and that might actually be a future session we do, because I've seen so strongly that you differentiate yourself when you're actually able to speak at an executive level to numbers. That's what a CEO is looking at. CFO, anyone who's in the C-suite, they're looking at numbers, pure, hard, budgetary, projections, forecasts. So you got to understand that.
And it's a little intimidating. I mean, you get in with a CFO and you're talking CapEx and OpEx, and that's sort of like the easy stuff, and then they start talking about ARR, and you get pretty deep pretty quickly in those conversations. And so, like, I often watch YouTube videos about finance because it's one of those things, like, I find as a salesperson, because it's not part of what I have to do, managing my own team's budget, I forget. So I either read the book, I have it on my Kindle, or I'm constantly looking at videos, kind of refreshing every 6 months so that I can be really current on sort of the latest financial lingo and what's coming in the market and what's coming down the road in terms of new regulations for companies. I mean, I would say that sort of the hyper-regulation space has also become an opportunity, because some of you guys are probably selling software that helps them be compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley or any of these other new regulations that the federal government is coming down with, a lot of privacy regulations. So I think that being fluent in that and then being able to speak to the financial aspects of those is really, really important. And most salespeople weren't finance experts in college, I don't think.
No.
So I think that what we're trying to do is we've taken a fairly stable concept. I don't know if you're all familiar with BANT. It's made popular by IBM. So it's when you're trying to qualify for budget, authority, need, and timing. So that's that was, for a lot of years, that was, every sales rep should try and get to those 4. If you get to BANT, then you can move it forward. And I've heard a nice riff on this recently called PACT, which is in the C, so it's pain, authority, and the big one that I'd like to focus on is the consequence of not doing anything. So that's your status quo, right? So if you keep doing what you're doing right now, what's the cost of that? And if you can really get your head around it, that C, that's a really important lever, regardless of the size of the company. I mean, it's just, because you can get to pain. Most people are pretty good at uncovering first or second level pain. Authority, you can sort of figure out who are the decision makers, what's it going to look like, who's got the authority to actually sign. Timing, again, you can it's pretty simple to navigate around that. I think consequence is the big one. And I was delighted when BANT became PACT, because I think that's an important tool or line of questioning that I've really coached our sales reps to try and get to.
Yeah, and I think it's really really important that you, just stressing this idea of first level, second level pain. I heard one person describe it as, you gotta ask 5 whys. Because the first why will just get the real surface of the pain. Second will be getting a little bit deeper, but until you actually go down a few levels, and it may be, you may perceive it being annoying to the person that is receiving these questions, but ultimately it actually uncovers a lot of information that generally you're not thinking about from the buyer perspective. So I really like that idea of like tact, the 5 whys, and also just having some financial acumen. Moving towards kind of like the middle part of the deal. You've got people interested. And before you even think about closing, you gotta do all these like middle things correctly. And that comes down to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, which was this idea of being able to coach your champions, be able to understand the political landscape, and then to build consensus, even though there may be people actively selling internally against you. So what have been some of your kind of experiences around trying to develop your internal champions, to understand the lay of the land, and to do that consensus building? What, for example, at Delta, what do you
Sure.
do?
Well, we actually have stolen a couple of pages out of the TAS playbook for that, in target account selling, in that we, for most of our enterprise accounts, we'll have the rep bring in a deal to his peers. So we've got a group of 10 folks sitting in the room or whatever, and he's got 5 to 10 minutes to summarize the deal, and then, just kind of the lay of the land. And then all of the peers are there just asking questions. Do you know about this? Do you know about that? Where are your blind spots? Because often, if you're in a deal and you've been involved for months, chances are you're too close to it. Even if you're part of a team, you're missing, what is it, the forest for the trees. So it's nice to be able to have some help in uncovering what you don't know. What's gonna bite you? Maybe you don't know that there's that really important influencer in the corner, or something like that. So we'll do that questioning, inquisition for 5 to 10, and then we'll build a strategy out from there. So that we often will employ in the middle of a sales process,
I like
because
that.
it's just, and it's done, nobody plays gotcha ball because they know they're up next, so no one's a jerk. It's all very constructive, and it's really, and I think it helps people to kind of apply that themselves when they're not in front of, the crowd. But we've used that to really make sure that a deal stays on track, and that we're not ignoring we're not skipping too far, too quickly, and not getting the middle part of the process done. I think people go from, initial demo or inquiry all the way to trying to close, and there's so much important territory in the middle that has to be covered.
Yeah, and it's so critical. A friend of mine, Tim Sanders, talks about sales as not this lonely adventure, but it's really a team sport. And to me, that just became something we just did at Oracle, which just rigorously would always question, because it's very easy to miss the critical thinking part of your sale and just have happy ears and get all excited, like, oh, we're going to close the deal, and it's going to happen this quarter. Let's see, just talk to like two people.
Single threading.
Single
Number
threading.
one-
Threading is such a-
Number one risk in sales is, I think, and we talked about this earlier, for us, back in the day, you would sell just to IT. And then there was a shift where you were just selling to the business, and you were trying to almost box IT out because they were seen as a negative. And what I find now is the smartest salespeople actually have a really like a multi-pronged approach, and it's you sell to the line of business generally, because that's the one you're helping them make the business case for using. They're going to be the one that really wants and expresses that, yes, I want this tool, it's going to help us. And then you're selling to IT, because we see a lot of projects that were sold to the business fail because IT wasn't involved enough. They hired a contractor, the contractor implemented the product, they listened to only functional people, and there's no governance. So, you've got to involve IT. But then the other sort of party that's out there that a lot of times the salespeople don't try to engage actively is procurement. And what I found, so we just did a big deal, it was in the press, so I can say it. We did a big, huge deal with Hershey. And the interesting thing was they got a new head of procurement 7 months ago. So 7 long months ago, they got a new head of procurement, and the CIO had not met her when we went to do our deal last month. So she's been on board for 6 months, And so, you know, they go to the board of directors, they get this whole enterprise transformation approved, everything's good, so we're thinking, okay, we're gonna send out our contracts, this thing's gonna be signed, boom. And then, whoa, there was a lot of surprises at the 11th hour. And like one of the deals is still not signed. There's about 5 different deals that comprise this big thing, but one is still in contracts, one just closed today. You know, and Hershey was doing press releases about this almost a month ago. And, but because, you know, you would think that the senior leadership would have actually talked to their counterpart in procurement. Well, she changed a whole bunch of policies without anybody knowing about it. And so now, you know, that was a great lesson learned for us. Like, hey, the customer doesn't want you to talk to procurement. But this is where you have to say, you coach your customer saying, listen, you know, I know you don't want me to reach out to these people, but you need to reach out to make sure that they can coach you on how to successfully drive this to closure, because you want the software by a certain time frame. We don't want to have any last minute surprises. The other last minute surprise group that I find remarkably we never seem to remember to call until we're like negotiating a contract is security. There's always a CISO. Every company has a CISO or somebody who cares about security, and we're always selling software that's installed on servers or in the cloud or something, and the security team always has an opinion, but we never ask them literally until 2 days before we have it forecasted to close. So to me, now, you know, we have a new roadmap that says, no matter, I don't care if you're dealing with the CEO, and I did have a sale once where we still were selling and we were at the CEO and CEO, yes, we're gonna get that done at the end of the quarter. And the CEO didn't know the legal process of their parent company. And as it turned out, they were in California. We thought we were gonna get the deal signed at 5 p.m. Well, they were like, oh no, we have to deal with this attorney in North Carolina who went home 2 hours ago. And so, you know, you've got to address all of these groups, and let me tell you, your customer does not want to talk to procurement. Like they don't want to talk to procurement, but you have to force that and really talk to them about getting coaching so that you can be successful at the 11th hour. It just saves a lot of heartache.
If I can piggyback on that thought, because that's one of our big pains, and you know, we have, what, 2 days left in the quarter, so yes, I'm feeling this real time now. So thanks all for coming for the quarter end. But you know, I have reps and enterprise reps who have happy years. Mark, to use your phrase, they get the business. The line of business will say, yes, it's a go. We're going with you. Awesome. And they come home and they celebrate and they, you know, throw a parade. They have no real understanding for the legal process, the procurement process. Is it 2 days, 2 weeks, 3 months, red lines? You know, that's 80%. You get a verbal, you get the commitment of the line of business. You still have all the gnarly stuff to deal with, and that's the hardest part. Because no, that's not glamorous. That's hideous. But that's the stuff that you need to do prior to actually getting ink on paper. And so invariably, we're asking, okay, that's great that you got that verbal. Congrats, that's wonderful. What are the next steps? Who do we have to know? You know, what is the internal process? Purchase recs, purchase orders. What's the, you know, and as you get bigger and bigger in a company, those processes get, you know, worse and worse in terms of longevity. So that's been a really tough coaching point for us.
Absolutely, and you really have to know the personality of your customers too. I recently had a case with a CIO where, you know, it was the second or third time they had let us down, like we thought we were doing a deal. And in this case, the line of business said we had won. And even the employees of the CIO had said we won. And then they ended up not doing the deal with us. And needless to say, my boss was thankfully on the phone with this CIO, and she was like, this is so disappointing. I don't understand how this is happening. And the CIO said, the business cannot speak for themselves. It all comes down to me. And I was like, wow. And we sort of knew that that was her personality, but she had never explicitly stated it before quite that way. But basically she was saying, you know, it all comes down to me, and it's not happening this time.
You didn't kiss my ring.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, we did, but it still wasn't enough. Not enough kissing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I found that you really have to make sure you get a yes from all the different groups, because someone will surprise you in the process.
Can you talk coaching a little bit when you're working with your sales team, because it does become a challenge point when you are working with the business team to get them to step out of the water and start getting this process going beforehand to really start stretching their arms out and get more people involved until essentially they're ready to buy. And then I mean, how do you coach your customers and get your sales team to coach your customers, you know,
That's very on point.
moving them
Yes.
on?
Yeah, so, I mean, the process of coaching your customer,
Right.
because you don't want to necessarily offend, but you gotta give them the lowdown and say, look, like I used to call it FLP in my Siebel days. I need to know what finance, how they approve things, I need to know how legal approves things, I need to know how procurement approves things. So what's your advice in terms of that coaching aspect for the folks that are supporting your deal on the buyer side?
The first thing I ask the customer is, have you ever bought software like this before, like an enterprise software? Have you ever, what's your experience been? Because if they say no, that is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
So who in your organization can help you through the process? And so you start asking them a series of questions about how they can get smart themselves. So do you have someone in procurement that's mapped to your team that you can go to for some advice? What we found is that, when we're in cases like this where someone has never been, the person driving an enterprise software purchase or any software purchase for that matter, that there are a lot of surprises. So having an internal advocate to help you from procurement or from legal, those things are help. So we try to teach our reps to ask sort of coaching, open-ended questions of the customers. But the first one is, when you last purchased enterprise software, how was that? How long did that take? Well, then they say, well, we haven't done that. Ironically, the one CIO that I was just referring to who did buy the software from us said, we said, well, how are we supposed to do business with you? Because she's an existing customer. And she said, well, what I would recommend is the date you think I'm going to buy, so the forecasted date, just add 2 months to that. It's a way to solve the problem.
Okay, yeah.
But so I mean, really, if we, so if we were talking to her staff and said, how's the process for you? Eventually, it would drill down to, well, my boss always makes a decision, or my boss always handles it. So I find it's the least offensive way to ask them questions and let them expose themselves as not having the experience needed. And then suggesting, well, why don't you reach out to someone in procurement, or why don't you reach out for someone in legal for coaching, or if someone else in your organization purchased software like that last year, why don't you talk to them for some advice?
And a tactic we've taken before is to kind of speak to, well, here are the previous experience. So we gently represent ourselves as expert on helping people through procurement processes. So, we have found in talking to a customer, in my previous experience, we really get snagged on this point and this point. So, legal takes a little while, purchasing, blah, blah, blah. So we speak to our previous experience and say, so can we get these parallel paths started? Can we exchange T's and C's? Because we're gonna get to red lines, we know that. So let's try and, multitask here. And we just help them, same kind of thing, rather than just, flat out asking or coaching. It's just gentler than that.
Does that help?
Very much, yeah.
Any other questions, folks, on enterprise deals? Procurement? Anyone have questions about handling procurement? Because that's always a fun little topic. We actually had a session in Philadelphia on how to sell to the CIO. Actually, we had 2 CIOs on the panel, so that was kind of interesting. But I think it might be useful to have a procurement one, because that's one that always trips people out.
They probably won't come. Last thing, I think they're allergic to being in a room full of salespeople. I mean, that's like they have PhDs in keeping salespeople at bay.
Save 10% because you're gonna have to give it to them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's their job.
And again, it's a metric. And I mean, I think that's a good thing to talk to. So we, once you become a customer of our company, we try to make relationships in procurement. Because, obviously when there's one deal, there's going to be multiple deals. So we try to, outside of the sales cycle, really get to know some people in procurement so that we can understand, how do you get compensated? Are you compensated on, how much you negotiate? Because we can factor that into the next deals that we do with your organization so that we can make sure that you can hit the metrics that you need. And I find that when you try to build that relationship outside of a sales cycle, it's a lot better received. And when you're asking them to coach you, so we do on average 3 transactions with your company, or we've done 2, or we've only done 1, but it was extremely painful, but we are anticipating doing 3 more throughout the year. Help us to understand how we can make that process more smooth. And I find that they're a lot more willing to talk with you when it's not the end of their fiscal year and they're not in an active sales cycle. And sometimes it does take your business partner within the company to champion you. And I've also noticed that for some reason procurement and IT don't seem to get along usually. So, you know, if you can find someone in IT who has a good relationship with procurement, oftentimes that's a good thing you want to leverage. But I find building that relationship in particular outside of a sales cycle is what you want to do, because those guys do have PhDs and the Heisman and keeping salespeople out of their business.
Oh, yes.
Brett.
Can you talk about how your relationship with your sales teams have changed? You talked in the beginning about, you know, how the sale has changed, but because of things like HR rules, compliance, you know, I'm sure you both had days when there was a lot of drinking amongst the team per se. You know, there was a lot of political correctness, if you will. Can you talk about how your management of your sales team has changed, if it has?
I'm not sure it has changed all that much. Yeah, we still have happy hour. I mean, it's certainly not a fraternity party at work, but I'm very fortunate in that I work with a lot of more development, you know, just more entry level or younger salespeople. I'm not in HR, so I can say that. So, you know, I love that because it keeps me young, and I help people who are on a very rapid growth trajectory in their sales careers, and I really enjoy that. So, I mean, do we have rules? Absolutely. Do we, you know, are we sensitive to inclusion and diversity? Yeah, of course. But we still are fun. It's still, you know, it's still a trash talking, competitive sales floor with, you know, boards and numbers all over the place and a gong. And I mean, we still have fun with the job because we're there 10 to 12 hours a day. We go crazy otherwise. So we do have happy hours at the end of months and end of quarters, and we do enjoy our, you know, beer and wine and such. So
I think the startup world has got it right. They have the keginators set up in the
Yes.
pantries. You know.
dogs running around the office.
And
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, at Siebel, you know, our culture was if your desk isn't like spotless and you're not in this, you know, well-pressed suit and tie, you shouldn't be working there. It was like, so a lot of it was just dependent upon culture.
Yeah, so I work for that. I work for SAP. I mean,
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
you know, the woman that does my nails is like, are you ever going to paint your nails other than skin color? And I'm like, no, because I work at a very buttoned up company. You know, even our customer conference is business. So it's like when I first went to Sapphire and all these people wearing suits, I was like, what is wrong with this place? You know, because I was used to Salesforce where, you know, they had, you know, MC Hammer was leading up the keynote. And you know, for me, you know, I work in a much different environment where it's a little bit more buttoned up. I would say the challenge is taking people who are old school salespeople and very relationship driven and converting them into the new sort of challenger sale is probably the biggest challenge. And so we actually do CEB's challenger sales training for our teams because, you know, it's no longer just because Deb MacArthur's been mapped to Hershey for a dozen years that they're going to buy from her. Now, the relationship is really important. So having that right relationship does make a big difference. But for me, we do have to do a lot of coaching around the value selling and about our reps challenging our customers and what they think they know, and also bringing to the table failures. So you know, if a customer wasn't successful, why weren't they successful? And you're gonna use the same product. So we have to help to coach this salespeople not to be afraid to talk about other people's failures because they happen every now and then, unfortunately. So I see that as one area of difference. You know, I think we all drink, but because it's such a sort of a family corporate culture, I mean, one of the executives doesn't let you curse, and which is obviously I don't talk to him very much because I used to work in Oracle for 14 years. So,
Yeah, it's a little
But
hard,
it's a
yeah.
little hard, but, so I would say that, it's just establishing that level of professionalism, and then, an ongoing method of coaching, particularly senior people, to help them change with the times, I had to force a couple people who'd been with SAP like 15 years to get a Twitter account. They were like, what? And I said, listen, you've got to at least know what that is and follow your customer on Twitter, because you're gonna miss out on so much what they do because you're not there. And so, and you're gonna miss out on who your competition is, quite frankly. And that was the real eye-opener when some smaller startup companies were successfully selling into the big companies. And, like ServiceNow is the greatest example. They do a lot of things really well. And they were very successful at getting into a small subdivision of a big company and making the 70 people they sold to ferociously successful when they knew that the larger company was struggling. CIO leaves, new CIO comes in and says, oh, what do we use for enterprise management? And everyone's like, oh, Remedy, or oh, HP. And then these 70 people are like, we have ServiceNow, and it's like awesome. And the next thing you know, all of Symantec is using ServiceNow. And that's, so you've got to be selling against that, because you're a guy who's been selling to Symantec for 15 years, is used to selling to 5 guys in IT. Well, those guys are irrelevant anymore. And so you really have to make sure that you're comprehensive in your coverage of the whole company, because things like plays like that, software companies are real smart about running that play. And you've just got to really challenge, particularly the senior relationship sellers, to make sure that they're not getting complacent in their relationships and they're broadening the people that they speak with.
I think coaching.
Coaching.
You were going to say something?
Well, I was going to add one thing too, and as large companies, or in our company, we're very acquisitive. We're acquiring new companies all the time, and I think that actually can be a forcing function. Where you have a buttoned up. Deltek for years was 4 accountants by accountants, very buttoned up, and then they acquired us and a few others, and it's a much looser, kind of more of a crazy quilt of a company now, in a good way. And I think that as you bring in these smaller companies, we acquired a company out in Portland, Oregon, and when you talked about suits and such, they think cargo shorts are our business, casual kind of thing. So everyone's fully tatted with the classic Portland look, but they get their work done and they're very effective and they're great salespeople. They're just funky. They're just Portland. So Deltek has had to morph in their sort of overall approach to selling and to accommodate a bunch of these smaller companies that we've hired or that we've acquired. And I think we're better for it.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for a time in a company that was based in San Diego. First meeting I held, it was being nice though, started at 10 a.m. And the first person walks in, they're in a wetsuit.
Oh,
So I got very clued into the culture right away. Question?
Yeah, hopefully this question wasn't asked the 2 minutes I was in the restroom, but what hasn't changed? So what are some of the things that have always stayed the same for your sales success?
Great question. So I think knowing a ton about your customer's business is just sort of sales 101. And knowing about your product, being the expert on your product is, sales 101. So really, I think there's so much available about the customers now. You have to take that to a really deep level, not being single-threaded. It's a continuing theme that I remember coaching people on that in 1995, and we still coach it today because it's so easy to get excited and think you're working with the person, and then you find out that they are not the person. So I think, there's basic fundamental, and then consistency I find to be very important, whether you're reaching out on a regular basis, but I love the contactually tool because, it helps you to be more consistent in your outreach as you build relationships and you maintain those relationships. Keeping that dialogue with a prospect when they're not actually in an active sales cycle. Those things are all so important because it's really easy to start selling when you get an RFP, but it's more important that you're communicating and getting in front of those things that are happening. And I think as much as a company can keep, if a rep is doing the right things, keeping them on at the same account is really important. as long as you can ride it out. I know it's sort of industry standard to get a new account rep every year or two when you're a customer, but I think customers hate that.
And it's kind of like how, when I was managing Verizon, or kind of how, you know, all the CEOs, like, so how long are you gonna stay in this role? Like 6 months?
Yeah.
That seemed to be like the industry average for Oracle and some of
Yeah.
our bigger relationships.
Yeah.
But,
I would answer it a little differently and say that, you know, it's still at the end of the day, in addition to everything that Carrie Ann's already called out, just having self-discipline and accountability.
Yeah.
You know, my best reps, I don't need to manage them. I don't need to harp on their activity. I don't need to harp on Salesforce accuracy, et cetera. They do it themselves. They are just, you know, men of steel. They just have that core that just holds themselves accountable. And, you know, it's just too easy when you're researching for a company and you're really trying to get to know them to get sucked into the internet, and one link leads to another link, and you can spend hours researching your company and completely avoid phone calls, right? You know, so, and do it under the guise of, well, I'm doing research. Yeah, come on. You read 2 other articles, you've done some email, etc. So I think having that discipline to say, I know I need to make N calls a day into this account, or I need to touch this account N times a quarter, and having that accountability to yourself well before any manager or executive asks you about that outcome is really what sets apart successful salespeople.
But then you also think that phone calls is something that is also something that hasn't changed, because I know a lot of times.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
the debate of the moment. I work with a bunch of young
Phone
people,
call.
right? And it's
Yeah.
that they love email, and I'm so old school. Pick up the phone. But I'm changing. We're meeting in the middle somewhere, because I think I didn't give email enough credit, and I'll admit this, even though there's no one here from my organization, that, you know, you can get a lot accomplished in email.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you have to pick up a phone. I really don't buy that you can really develop a relationship and sell stuff either face to face or on the phone. I think it's a happy mix. Extremely one or the other, or exclusively one or the other is a fail.
And you have to remember, I mean, think about how many times you skim an email and you didn't get the main topic, and then somebody calls you and you're like, oh, is that what that message is about? You know, or is that what was the point being conveyed? You just don't get it. I mean, we're all so busy. I like phone calls, I like conference calls, and then I like the follow-up email that reiterates what we discussed and outlines the action items. I think, you know, the other big thing that sometimes we get away from because there's so much competition, but every time that there's a give, so the customer asks us for resources, we need a get. And the give and get, I don't think has changed. That's a kind of an old school mentality, but it's really true. You know, if you're asking me to demo, I'm gonna ask you to get your boss to that meeting where we demo, or get another decision maker that we haven't met to be participating. You know, and then I'm gonna outline that to you. I'm so stunned at the number of my reps that do not send summary emails to clients, just outlining the action items and the amount of time, you know, here's who is responsible for the action item and when it's gonna be done. I mean, it seems like sales 101, but it takes a little time to compose a decent email. And
It gets down to the discipline that you're
it's the
talking about.
discipline to
You
do
have
it.
that habit.
Yeah, you've got to cultivate that habit. I really think that that's very important because it sets the expectation. I mean, I think the other piece of advice I give to people along the managing your time perspective is when you're talking with a customer, salespeople have a tendency to drop everything. Okay, we're talking and you want me to send you this. Okay, so now I'm going to drop everything and do a whole bunch of research and work and talk to my technical people and prepare this thing for you. And you are going away on vacation and you're not going to look at it for a week and a half. So that was totally unnecessary. So I constantly am reminding my people to say, how about if I hear you that you need that information, how about if I get that to you in 2 days? If that's not good enough for the customer, if they need it the next day for a meeting, they're going to tell you. And the good thing is now you know when their meeting is. So there's like a double whammy, you know. But think of a very conservative timeline to give the customer as to when you're going to get this contract information back. Or, you know, we get a lot of requests like for when is support due on something. You know, so I say, give me 2 days on that. Does that work for you? And if it doesn't, usually they tell you. But then you can get good information about why they're asking that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise given. So those are some basics that I think are timeless.
associate. I call it like, you know, going rover, right? Because that's what happens. You get a customer, they want this. You're not asking for any sort of commitment on the other side, and you're just running, and you're not doing the things that you should to get some level of commitment, build valuable, call it your sales SLAs, or your customers and prospects. Establish those SLAs. Don't always respond immediately. You shouldn't be reactive to sales. You should be always thinking about a broader, bigger approach to your campaign. That's how I think of sales. You're structuring a campaign. Everything has its time and its place. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll pass 8 p.m. But I do want to ask one last question before we wrap up this evening. Is there any sort of book, movie, just something that you kind of come across recently that you felt super inspiring?
Inspiring. What I live by is called Cracking the Sales Management Code. And it's all about analytics and accountability and Deltek's very data driven, but it's data for I'm not sure what's, but for what sake, right? So it goes from you're collecting everything and you're measuring everything to measure fewer but more meaningful metrics and then hold people to those. And we follow the exercise, but it walks you through, kind of from your business priorities to your this priority to that priority, and then it identifies the metrics that you really count, that you should really focus on. And I mean, my copy of that book is highlighted, it's got sticky notes on it, it's a mess. But I do go back to that frequently, so that's one I would recommend.
It's a great book.
Yeah, so I'm a big Challenger sales gal. I love the Challenger sales book. If you haven't read it, I think it's definitely worth a read. And then also this Financial Intelligence for Managers book, which I'll get you the information on that so we can send it out to everybody. But it's my Bible. The other thing I would say that I'm a junkie for Bloomberg News on the radio, like on XM 119 only on my car, and I read the Wall Street Journal. I'm an avid reader of Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune. I think that gives you something to speak with your customers about, and because it's interesting. There's stuff that the customers. It's usually articles about my customers' that then I can engage them in conversation on, and that just helps again for you to reiterate how much you know about their business. So for me, those are I'm not as inspired by any books. For me, I'm really inspired by articles that I read in those magazines and newspapers.
So if I can add one thing to it, I think it varies by industry that you cover. So whatever your vertical is, you nailed it a second ago. I read GovExec and GovTech every morning, right? So I get my morning feed and my evening feed of the news, and I prospect in there. If this company was just awarded a contract and they're not a customer, I send that off to the rep, and the reps are supposed to be doing that as well. So whatever your industry or your vertical, just find out what the top 2 or 3 periodicals, dailies, what have you are, and just remain a student of the industry, because that just builds your credibility regardless of your vertical and helps you really speak with some knowledge, whereas your other sales competitors may not make that investment and may not bring that same demonstrated knowledge to the table.
I can't iterate that enough. Just get knowledge, because I think really the biggest thing that's changed in sales is that buyers really expect more of their salespeople. Mm-hmm. They actually rely on sales more and more to get the better perspective, the insights, and to be challenged. They're not getting that. They're not moving the organization forward. This is awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks. Oh, yeah. Well, okay.
No, I just wanted to ask if anyone had anything they wanted to say, not a question. Just.
Oh, yeah. Let's. Well, what I want to do is I just wanted to say thank you, and maybe just a round of applause, please, because this is.